I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and you have had the incredible good fortune to tune into this special pre-recorded version of For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you and your wealth, your health, your happiness, and your pocketbook. And it's a pre-recorded show, so unfortunately no one will be able to call in, but it is a high-quality show nonetheless, meeting or exceeding our standards of quality for live shows. And so what we have is, for the next 15 minutes or so, we're just going to chat a little bit. And then we have an interview with Tim Judson of NIRS, that's Nuclear Information and Resource Service. And he's going to give us an update on President Biden's plans to use federal tax dollars to bail out nuclear power plants, which are uneconomical. And so, as you may guess, they're working to stop that, and we'll see how much progress they've made in this interview with Tim. Then we're going to hear from our wonderful, wonderful patrons and advertisers. And then we'll hear from Rebecca, who takes us to Puerto Rico and other warm island nations to talk about the coqui, a cute little frog down there native to Puerto Rico with all sorts of interesting things in their life cycle. Then we'll be hearing ecological news and information, and that'll be it for this show. And hopefully you stick around as we delve into the world through the eyes of an ecologist. And one of the things that I saw this past week that I wanted to mention to you folks, as I was driving a friend to the airport, I drove up to the Detroit airport this past week, and I was going on I-75 and I-475 there, and I saw a deer in the median on I-475, just west of I-75. And that's pretty sad, seeing a deer that's been hit. Cars kill hundreds of thousands of animals every year, and just another reason we should be switching to trains. But I saw that deer, that was sad, and then I saw a bald eagle next to the deer. And a lot of people think of bald eagles as fisher, catching fish and things, which is true, but a bald eagle will not pass up carrion. And so this poor bald eagle got suckered in by the dead deer, I'm sure, and then it was hit by a car, and it was also killed. And so that was pretty depressing to see a dead deer and a dead bald eagle. And then a little later on the trip, I saw on the side of the road what looked like a wolf, a dead wolf. Now, it probably wasn't a wolf, but it was awfully big for a coyote. And so what I'm thinking it was what they call a coy wolf. And that is that we've rooted the numbers of wolves. We brought the numbers of wolves down so much. Normally, they are deadly enemies of the coyotes. Normally, where you find wolves, you don't find coyotes because the wolves eat them. But things have been so turned upside down by our development. We've developed everywhere that a lot of wolves are actually interbreeding with coyotes now. So I think this may have been a coy wolf. And it is sad to see them all dead on the side of the road, but at least it means that there are some. I mean, wildlife surveys often use roadkill in order to determine what population sizes are. And so it was just interesting to see all three of those animals in the space of an hour or so in the same area. So looks like we definitely have coyotes, and we may have some coy wolves. I don't think it wasn't big enough to be a full-fledged wolf or timber wolf, but I just wanted to let you folks know that. Another thing I saw this past week was Nova had a special, and the special is called Arctic Drift. And it was a very dramatic and beautiful Nova. A bunch of scientists spent the winter of 2019-2020 locked in Arctic ice. They brought their ship up as far north as they could. They let it freeze into the polar ice cap, and then they just rode the ice cap along as it flows along over from the Russian area of Russia over to like Greenland or so. And it was, of course, they were doing it for scientific reasons, and they created this whole city on the ice of hundreds and hundreds of experiments testing, what exactly global warming is doing to the ice. And typical of the modern Nova, there wasn't a lot of information, wasn't a lot of results of these experiments. I mean, once upon a time, you'd actually see the occasional formula on Nova, and they would take the time to explain what all the elements of the formula was and like how it worked. No, this Nova today is mostly pretty pictures, and there were some absolutely beautiful pictures, striking pictures of the Arctic. But the couple facts they did give us was that part of what's happening in global warming is that there's more snow on the polar ice caps, which you'd think would be a great thing, but it turns out that it's not a good thing for a couple reasons. One, during the Arctic winter, there is no sun. And so clouds that form to drop the snow, usually when in a part of the Earth where there's both sun and night, then the clouds will reflect solar energy back out into the space during the sunny times, and then it acts like a blanket at night to keep the Earth warm. Well, in the North Pole, for 6 months of the year, there is no sunlight. It's just dark. So the only thing those clouds are doing are keeping it warm, holding the heat in. And it also turns out that as the snowpack gets thicker, the warmth that would normally escape out through the ice get conducted through the ice and back out, radiate out into space. The snowpack blocks the heat coming out from underneath, from the warmer ocean, and so the ice melts from underneath. And so that's one of the few facts that they gave. So it's compelling. I'd urge you to watch it. But one thing that did get put in there that I think is worth noting, when we started this show back in 2019, we were talking about the positive feedback loop. In other words, that global warming, the effects of global warming are to create more global warming, and that's feeding it back on itself so that the temperature rise can be exponential, so that it can just shoot through the roof at some point. And I have been saying this for well over 20 years. In fact, I used to have a show called Green Radio that aired in Buffalo. It's very similar to this show. And I, on Green Radio, was saying, look, it's clear we're caught in a positive feedback loop. Back then, no scientist would go that far. And even in 2019, when we started this show, very few scientists were willing to go that far because they didn't want to create a panic. They weren't certain we're in a positive feedback loop. In this show, on this Nova, those scientists who spent the winter going over the North Pole well, they came within 200 miles of the North Pole, but who spent the winter in the polar ice cap, they don't have any doubts, and they've accepted that we are in a positive feedback loop. For one thing, scientists of a lot of different disciplines, meteorologists and geologists and oceanographers and atmospheric scientists, all those people were getting together, and so they could all compare notes. And I'm sure they were saying, oh, wait a minute, this effect is increasing that effect, and this effect is increasing that effect. There is no more doubt in the scientific community. We're caught in a positive feedback loop, folks. And as I've said before, the only way to get out of a positive feedback loop is to stop the input. If the most common example of a positive feedback loop is if you take a microphone and put it up to the speaker attached to that microphone. The sound waves get amplified over and over again until the whole system screeches. You've all heard that screech of a feedback on a microphone. Well, if you cut off the input, if you cover up the mic, the screech stops. And so if we stop putting the carbon in, if we stop with putting in the initial thing that's causing all these positive effects, we can stop the positive feedback loop, and then we can slowly come back down to normal temperatures. And so I just wanted to talk about those couple things. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to mention in terms of before we get to our interview with Tim Judson, and that is that I was listening to C-SPAN. I get C-SPAN on my car radio, and there was a hearing about PFAS. We've talked about PFAS contamination before, and it's one of the few pollutants that Republicans are willing to deal with, they're willing to do legislation on, because the U.S. chemical industry long ago got out of the PFAS business. They looked at the ecological and environmental effects of PFAS, and they said, this stuff is nasty, we're not going to make it anymore. So there are no PFAS lobbyists. There's no money being tossed at them in support of the PFAS industry. So there were some hearings, some congressional hearings that I was listening to on C-SPAN. And the thing about it was that both Democrat and Republican legislators were saying to the speakers who were doing this, what can the government do to help with this problem? And we have reached a point of almost 2 decades of hands off, government's not supposed to do anything. The witnesses never gave them an answer. The witnesses were never able to say the simple things that need to be done, which are A, prohibit the manufacture of PFAS, B, prohibit the import of products with PFAS from other countries, because a lot of other countries, they're still manufacturing it, and C, provide federal funding to clean up places in the U.S. that have identified PFAS contamination, because most of these places are places around things like airports or Air Force bases where PFAS was used in the foam for firefighting, and that foam would often get sprayed even if there weren't a lot of fires for practice purposes and things. And so if you surround some place like that with wells and you suck out all the groundwater that's being contaminated with the PFAS and you treat it and then pump it back in again, you can prevent the spread of that groundwater into the surrounding area where it will contaminate wells that people drink from and things like that. I mean, those are 3 really basic, simple things, but nobody could actually articulate this to the congressman because they're not used to the government asking this anymore. They're not used to the government saying, well, what can we do? And then maybe passing a law to actually do it, because we've been so trained by the conservatives and the anti-environmental media to think, oh, it's got to be an industry solution, it has to be voluntary, it's got to be, everybody has to get on board. Well, the chemical manufacturers are on board. Everybody is on board. But we've lost, the ability of the government to actually regulate has become atrophied. One of the points that came out was that the department in the EPA that's looking at some of these things only has 20 people in it. And we're talking about millions of people being affected and possibly thousands of places of contamination. And if you've only got 20 people, they're not going to be able to do an adequate job of protecting the United States of America. And so another answer that should have been given to those congressmen was beef up the employment at the Environmental Protection Agency around this issue. And instead, the Congress just wanted, some of the conservative congressmen were just like, well, should we should give deadlines. And, if you don't have adequate workforce, it doesn't matter what kind of deadlines you set. You're not going to meet the deadlines. And so those are just some things that I saw this past week. And I think we're almost ready to get on to our interview with Tim Judson. Welcome to For a Green Future. If you could just share your name and your organization with us.
Sure. My name is Tim Judson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Nuclear Information and Resource Service.
All right. Well, we have been talking with you folks. We had Diane DeRigo on earlier a couple months back because of the fact that there's so much money budgeted in President Biden's budget for bailing out existing nuclear power plants. And so we just kind of wanted to get an update of how's that battle going. I know you folks are working to help head that off.
Sure. Well, you wouldn't know it by the coverage in the news media, but we actually have been making some progress on at least whittling down the amount of subsidies that are in the what's now called the Build Back Better Act, which is the $3.5 trillion spending bill that the Democrats are working their way through the House and the Senate. Now, just for some perspective, when the White House and Congress first started floating these proposals to include, large amounts of subsidies for old nuclear power plants in these big spending bills back in the spring, we were looking at something that could have been as much as $100 or even $200 billion over the course of 10 years,
wow.
Which would have just been, an astronomical subsidy out of proportion to anything that's ever occurred in history. Now, we've really been mobilizing thousands and thousands of people to contact their Congress members in the White House for months. And as this process has gone on, the proposals that are in the legislation have gotten reduced substantially. But we're still looking at potentially $35 billion in subsidies, new subsidies for old nuclear power plants in these spending bills.
Wow, $35 billion. That's a lot of potential wind turbines and solar panels.
Oh yeah, exactly. And and I can't reiterate this enough. These would be new subsidies for 30 and 40 and 45-year-old nuclear power plants. This is not going to create a single new job despite the vast amount of money going into it. And since they're already talking about cutting the amount of the total spending in these bills, that's money that if it goes to nuclear is not going to go to other things that this country really needs.
Yeah. I remember during the House Bill 6 debacle, during the hearings there, it was pointed out that the subsidies they were proposing, and that was only $1 billion, it would be cheaper to simply pay the salaries of the people working at the plant for the next 10 years and not keep the plant going.
That's right. And in fact, these subsidies that they're talking about doing through this federal bill would amount to 2 or even 3 times as much as the total salaries of all of the workers at the nuclear power plants that would get the subsidy.
Yeah, so the argument, we need this to keep the jobs. Well, we could keep the jobs, just don't subsidize the nuke plants. So you mentioned thousands of people, and you've also organized. There's been a lot of organizations too, haven't there? Telling the.
That's right. Yeah. This proposal is deeply unpopular. With organizations across the country, and so in August we delivered. A letter to Congress signed by 248 organizations calling for them, to stop all subsidies for nuclear power and to put all of that money into real, climate and environmental justice solutions like renewable energy, energy efficiency, and environmental cleanups.
Right, things that actually work, and I think it's also important to point out that there was just a report by Dutch wind that we reported on last week that essentially the nuclear industry worldwide is dying. I mean, it's sort of dying a natural death, both from economics and because it's dirtier power. Should we try to save it?
No, I mean, this is, first of all, to promote any technology that is as polluting and harmful as nuclear power is, there would have to be some compelling justification to do so, right? Whether it's, we've got to make a trade-off between saving the climate or keeping the lights on, whatever it happens to be. The reality of the matter is that we don't need nuclear power to do any of those things, and so the only reason for continuing these bailouts is really to help the corporations who don't have a solution to their own problems with what to do with these old nuclear power plants that are frankly getting much more expensive to operate as they get old, and also from the public standpoint also getting a lot more dangerous, and they're producing nuclear waste that we just don't have a solution for, and that puts communities at risk.
Yeah, we in the past year we've had a couple unplanned shutdowns here at our local nuclear plants. We've got Davis-Besse just to our east, and we've got Fermi 2 just to our north. And both of those have had some unplanned shutdowns and sometimes it was a very inopportune times when it was when we were having heat waves and things like that. And so that,
sure. Well, and not to forget that that Fermi was actually shut down for several months, in 2020 because of the COVID outbreak, and because the utility DTE didn't do enough to protect its workers from infections. And they ended up with such a high, with hundreds of workers becoming infected, and they couldn't actually get the reactor back online after refueling it. And so, what we're talking about, what are going to be resilient and reliable forms of energy going forward? Nuclear power plants actually have real vulnerabilities to things like the pandemic and to the climate crisis.
Right. So, the news right now is saying that the big thing in Washington that everybody's doing at the moment is figuring out where they can cut this bill. And this seems like a pretty natural place to cut because, as you say, it's so unpopular. If some of our listeners decided to call, let's say, Representative Capter, who is pretty influential in this process, what sort of things would you suggest they say?
Well, they should ask Representative Capter to support, and make sure that these nuclear subsidies are removed from the final bill. And we don't support decreasing the amount of the spending. I mean, we need all the money we can to solve the climate crisis and rebuild the economy. But these nuclear subsidies aren't going to help with either of those things. So they should be cut out no matter what happens.
Right. And I think research has shown that the countries that put money into nuclear don't put as much money into the wind and the solar as they should.
That's generally true. Although, for instance, I would say that we have a really strong counterexample with China, which is the only country where nuclear is being built at any significant rate. But in fact, they're building wind and solar at many times the rate they're building new nuclear plants in China. And China has seen that renewable energy is a far better. It's proved that the renewable energy is a far better solution to the climate crisis than nuclear power. The truth is that most countries invest in nuclear power, not really for energy reasons, right? I mean, there is still this connection between nuclear energy and nuclear technology and nuclear weapons and global status, and that's the real reason that most countries are interested in nuclear power. But it's got nothing to do with with the climate crisis or with or even with energy justice.
The hidden sort of monster behind this whole policy. Yeah, I guess when they're talking about Iran and their nuclear program, even the U.S. They've been saying, oh, they have a perfect right to have nuclear power. We just don't want them to have nuclear weapons. But pursuing the one, as you say, can lead very easily to getting the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there's a great amount of hypocrisy in terms of, or at least inconsistency, in who the U.S. government supports having nuclear power and who the U.S. government doesn't want to have nuclear power. With a country like Iran, the U.S. government feels animosity toward. They don't want Iran to have nuclear technology. But is perfectly willing to cut deals with Saudi Arabia at the same time.
Right, and the only sort of ethically consistent would be, nobody encouraging no one to have nuclear power, and encouraging.
Well, and what about actually, transitioning the world to renewable energy? I mean, how much better would that be for countries' economic development, for countries' security, for peace in the world? Than to not have resource conflicts over whether it be oil or gas or access to nuclear weapons.
Right. Okay. Well, Tib, thanks so much for the update. It sounds like there's a reason for a little bit of hope there. That definitely the whittling down from possibly hundreds of billions down to 35 is good news. But I guess now is a good time to keep the pressure on to try to get rid of that last 35.
Well, it's absolutely essential, because what's happened is now that it's down to like $35 billion, this is really going to be targeted towards mostly two corporations. The company called Energy Harbor, which very well in Ohio as the owner of the new owner of your nuclear plants that were spun off from First Energy, and Exelon Corporation, which is also which, just like First Energy, is now the subject of federal criminal investigations into corruption over nuclear subsidies at the state level. So this is really a way for First Energy and Exelon to get subsidies out of the federal government that they can't get out of the states anymore.
We've reported on that before, that it seems like corruption and the nuclear industry kind of go hand in hand, because there's been so many instances in so many countries and so many states of just, all the usual evils of bribery and corruption and kickbacks and all those horrible things.
Well, we're in sort of a perfect storm right now, to lead to corruption, because we have these huge utility companies, right? First Energy, Exelon, Duke, and whatnot, who have massive amounts of political power in the states in which they're located. The utility companies are in every state one of the biggest political players on around, and but those same companies are facing huge financial risks because they continue to invest in fossil fuels and nuclear when we needed to be transitioning to renewables to face the climate crisis. And so now that they've made these bad decisions, they're facing billions of dollars of losses if we actually do what we need to do and transition to renewables. But what they're doing instead is basically using their political power to try to get billions and billions of dollars in subsidies and bailouts to keep their
All right, so evil on top of incompetence, I guess you could say. So, all right, Tim, well, thanks so much for coming on. Is there anything you'd like to add?
The good thing that happened last week was that the progressives in Congress managed to stave off a vote on the really dirty bipartisan infrastructure bill, which itself has $9 billion in subsidies for old and new reactors. But that means we've now got weeks and maybe even a couple of months to keep on building pressure to get on Congress to get this right. And so, so I think we shouldn't let our guard down because of this, but we really do need to continue organizing and mobilizing to get something really good done, and get the dirty energies, out of this bill.
All right, wonderful. Well, good luck, and we're rooting for you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Well, good luck to all y'all as well.
And there you have it. It's always nice to hear from our friends at NIRS, and it's encouraging that they've cut out a lot of the subsidy. We're down to $35 billion, but again, if you're choosing between feeding people and taking care of people and subsidizing Exelon and Energy Harbor, I think it would be good for the Democrats if they were to cut out the nuke subsidies and keep the social subsidies. So, but that's my opinion. And one other little thing I wanted to note is that it's kind of interesting. I tried to call the president. I tried to call the White House to leave a comment about this. And it turns out that the White House's public comment line is only open from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And that strikes me as kind of odd. I mean, I know that, of course, these comments don't actually get to the president, but I think it's useful as a way that the public can kind of let the White House know what people are thinking, and to reduce the time that people can actually call in and make comments. I just don't understand that. I mean, maybe it's staffing shortages. Maybe they found that, they're getting harassed, that maybe people, a lot of people who are really hostile just call up and aren't making comments, but they're just abusing the people on the other end of the line. But just something, I mean, we're supposed to be able to participate in our government, and if they do things like reduce the hours for the comment line, it makes it harder for citizens to do that. But one thing it's very easy for citizens to do in Northwest Ohio is go to our advertisers and help our advertisers. Four Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there are several ways you can get in touch with the Wood County Park District. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. Another is to go to their website, which is wcparks.org. And then you can also go to download their app. They have a nice little app. You just go to any app store and search for WC Parks. And of course, they're available on all the social media, Instagram, Facebook, and so forth, Twitter, and so forth. So that's the Wood County Park District. Be greener with the Wood County Park District. Four Green Future is also brought to you by our wonderful, amazing patrons who have persevered in supporting this program for many, many months now, and we're extremely grateful. We could not be bringing this show without our patrons, and so these are people who went to patreon.com. That's Patreon. They searched for 4A Green Future. Up popped our page, and they chose a kind of level that matches their budget. So no one has to suffer in order to support this program. The patronage of this program is cruelty-free, and you could join our patrons by going to 4A Green Future and on patreon.com and sign up yourself, and we'd really appreciate it if you did that. So that's patreon.com, search for 4A Green Future. All right, now we come to that portion of the show where we listen to our good co-host, our great co-host, Rebecca Wood. Rebecca's going to be talking to us about an uncharacteristically cute little thing in the ecology of the world, that is the coqui frog, one of the cutest little frogs around. So here's the interview with Rebecca. Okay, Rebecca, thanks for, I think you have a little thing for us about the coqui frog.
I do, yeah. Coquis are cool. They're frogs. You gotta like frogs.
That's true.
Yep. Yeah, they are the national symbol of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, sort of the mascot. And I was wrong. I think I said on the show, like, I don't know, a couple years ago maybe, that they're extinct in Puerto Rico. They're not. They're just a lot more common in Hawaii at this point. There's like greater density of coqui frogs or something, but they still are endemic to Puerto Rico, allegedly, according to this. Endemic is supposed to mean they're from there and they're only found there, and they should only be found there, but they're being found other places. They're in the order Anura, which is basically frogs, and the family Eleutherodactylidae, which is free-toed frogs, not the snack. It means that they do not have webbed feet and they're not adapted to swimming. Instead, they have little sticky pads, like that thing that's supposed to stick your shower caddy to the wall, but doesn't, basically, which work if there's moisture. they're named after their call, which is kind of sounds like coqui, descriptively. And the reason they have this call is apparently because the co part of it is to intimidate other male frogs, and qui is to attract female frogs. And the reason this works is that the auditory systems are different by sex in coqui frogs. So the various genders can't hear the thing that isn't aimed at them, which is crazy.
Wow.
They are a species of least concern, so they're doing all right. They're doing pretty good. Yeah, the males are 30 to 37 millimeters long. Females are 36 to 52 millimeters long. So lady froggies tend to be a little bit bigger. Something to do with the males use a lot of energy, probably trying to attract females or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's why they're smaller. They burn off more calories. Sorry, they tend to be larger at higher elevations for some reason. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe you can go further up if you're bigger because you carry more water in you or something.
Well,
they're basically
it might just be that it's cooler. The cooler someplace is, the larger the animals in that place.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so they've got more thermal mass.
Insulation, yeah. They're basically kind of a mottled brown color. The legs are a little browner usually. Sometimes they kind of have a W mark, like a tabby cat, I guess. So, but not always. You can't count on that. They live about a year on average. They can live as long as 6 years in the wild, which is longer than an opossum. Cheeto Pete. They're basically nocturnal, but their daily activities are pretty closely linked to moisture. Because they don't need, they're amphibians, but they don't need actually water to survive. They don't need ponds or anything. They just need moisture. They're famous, especially the juveniles are famous for hiding under leaves. And then when it gets more moist, they kind of, come out of whatever sort of little moist hollow they've been hiding in and climb further up in the tree canopy. I guess they can hunt there or something. I don't know. The genus Eleutherodactylus has 185 species. The one that we call the coqui frog is really, informally known as the common coqui. So, again, with the not being particularly endangered,
well,
they're the most. Sorry.
Well, there are a couple of the species in Puerto Rico that are a little more in trouble. I mean, most of them are doing okay, but there's a few that have, like ones that were specifically in the deep forest that are having
that
trouble.
Would make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're sorry, the common coqui anyway is the most abundant frog in Puerto Rico. And this is probably why this species is doing okay. They like to live in places such as Mesic broadleaf forests, mountains, inside of tree holes, in cities, under tree trunks, in bromeliads, under rocks and trash. Mesic Forest, by the way, Mesic is a term for a habitat which is moderately or wet and dry in a balanced way, as opposed to xeric, which is dry, and hydric, which is wet. So back and learned a new word again.
Yeah.
They can live up to 3,500 feet of. The adults tend to, generally speaking, because they're bigger, it makes sense, so they're going to go up higher, like we were saying. Yeah, they've been introduced to Colombia in the U.S. Virgin Islands. They're extremely invasive in Hawaii. Starting in the 1980s, I think they came over on a potted plant, possibly. The population there is 5 times denser than it is in Puerto Rico of coqui frogs. And they're on a list of the 100 worst invasive species in the world. So they were also introduced to the Dominican Republic, Louisiana, and Florida, but were eradicated. Although I would not trust the little suckers to come back. Apparently, they cost Hawaii $3 million a year, partly because nobody wants to use their plant nurseries anymore because they're afraid of getting coqui frogs. Although they're taking precautionary measures, but their damage has been done to the reputation basically. And also, they hurt real estate values because no one wants to live apparently in places where they're really, really loud at night. It's hard to sleep or distracting for some people, I guess, or something.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe it's like some people get really, really upset about cicadas, and others are like, "Oh, they sound lovely," So probably a matter of taste. But you don't want to be an acquired taste in real estate. You want to be universally popular, basically.
Well, now, so here's an example of an ecological issue that, you know, really directly affects people's pocketbooks. I mean, if it lowers the value of your house, all of a sudden,
Yeah,
invasive species might be something important to you.
pretty much. Yeah, it's not good. Apparently, they eat mostly arthropods, aka insects, crustaceans, and arachnids. The juveniles eat like small stuff like ants. Adults will eat spiders, moths, crickets, snails, and small frogs. I recall we were just mentioning a couple episodes ago things that eat crickets.
There you go.
This is one of them. Yeah, and yeah, the males apparently get left in charge of guarding the eggs for part of their life cycle, and this is a little interesting. They usually snack on a few while they're guarding them, which I could really relate to, because that's like what happens when you leave me alone to watch the Halloween candy. Like this last month I got 3 bags of Halloween candy. Since then, we've heard from our neighbor across the street that she hasn't had a trick or treater in 10 years. So ever since then, like, I hid them in the closet so my diabetic roommate with bad roommate control or bad impulse control can't find them. But ever since, so far I've only eaten about half a bag, so that's not bad for me. But male coqui frogs, same thing. They're like, well, I just need to keep up my strength so I can keep guarding the eggs. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
Okay. Kind of a guy
not,
thing. Yeah. Yeah.
not really trustworthy with anything edible, but much like myself.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So they're odd little critters, basically. They are.
Okay. And I knew Puerto Rican woman once. They're very proud of the coqui down there. I guess since it is the national critter, and
Right.
I actually have a little coqui pin that she gave me as a gift. Actual size. So
Cute. I think I might have mentioned once already that I saw a T-shirt once in the '90s that said "Coqui and Chupacabras on vacation together." It had a little picture of them both in a Jeep wearing Hawaiian shirts.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Rebecca.
Yes.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Hopefully, we'll be live back in the studio next week. But thanks for
Yeah.
helping out with our recorded episode here. Alrighty, so now we move on to the part of the show where we talk about eco news, ecological news. And we want to start out this week talking about something that we found out about 2 weeks ago. And that is that there's big protests going on right now down in D.C. They are protesting Line 3, and they're protesting essentially government support for fossil fuels altogether. A friend of the show, E. Joseph Apagard-Peltier III, is down there, and he actually turns out he got arrested, and then I was able to see on Facebook the next day he was emceeing the event, and apparently there have been well over 100 arrests of mostly young people who are out there basically trying to convince the government that we can't be supporting fossil fuels, and trying to push things like respecting treaty rights, because all over the country it's Native Americans protecting treaty rights that are standing in the way of these mega fossil fuel projects, none of which we can afford to have completed. I mean, we cannot continue to increase the amount of carbon we're putting in the air the way we have been for the last 10 years. And so kudos to the people out there in D.C. fighting the good fight. And this is another one which, even though there's hundreds and thousands of people involved and hundreds of people arrested, once again, this is not being covered by the mainstream media. So it's a good thing you're hearing about it here, because you wouldn't hear about it anywhere else. So, okay, on to our next story. Okay, for this next story, we go to the good old BBC, and they have a report. It was by Matt McGrath, and it was October 14th. It was published, called climate change, carbon emissions from rich countries rose rapidly in 2021. And it turned out that, as we've reported before, there was a global drop in carbon emissions back in 2020 because of the pandemic, which was very nice in terms of the carbon emissions. It was not very nice in terms of the global economy crashing and people being trapped in their homes. But unfortunately, 2020, things started opening back up again in such a way that the carbon emissions are expected to more than make up for where they were, especially in countries like China, which is very coal dependent. China is continuing to build new coal plants, but interestingly, the price of coal has gone up in China because the demand has gone up, but the Chinese government has complete control over the price of power. And so what's happened in China, sometimes the coal companies the electric companies have not been able to afford to buy the coal to run the power plants. So they're actually having power cuts, not because there's a lack of coal, but because they're forbidden from charging enough to make a profit, and which China is now looking to get rid of that limitation, and they're going to allow quote-unquote market rates to prevail, which is expected to create another huge surge in demand for coal. So China is leading the world in terms of solar and in terms of wind, but it's also leading the world in terms of coal. So and it's projected to put, it puts more CO2 into the atmosphere than the United States every year, and that's projected to accelerate. Now, one of the frameworks or one of the concepts behind all the agreements thus far on carbon is that we have to let the countries which aren't as developed, we have to let them increase their carbon emissions so that they can catch up to the rest of the world in terms of quality of life and so forth. Well, there's two things here. No, we can't allow them to do that, because if we do, we're going to crash through the barriers, and we're going to put way too much carbon in the air, and it's going to bring down society. It's going to bring down the global economic system. I mean, that's just a fact. And two, the fundamental idea that this is based on, that you must burn carbon in order to increase your quality of life, that has been proven to be untrue, because you can maintain and you can establish a high quality of life with all the energy that you need using wind and sun and conservation and storage and the technology which are now available, and they have not been available in the past. So the fundamental idea that somehow we have to be fair and let them increase their carbon the way that we got to, the way that we were able to over the past 100, 200 years, that fundamental idea is false. Yes, we need to bring people's quality of life up around the world, but no, we don't need to do it by allowing them to put out more carbon. And for our final story, as you know, I like to end things on a kind of an upbeat note. It turns out that Norway is on its way to becoming a 100% electric or plug-in hybrid car market by this spring. Now, the government had set a goal of 100% electric or plug-in hybrid by 2025, but the people of Norway basically said, no, we want it now. And so it's expected that the last internal combustion engine car is going to be sold this spring, around about April. And this is great news. And what allows this to happen, of course, is the infrastructure for car charging has to be there. There's a picture, and Yahoo News has a story on this called "Norway on Track to Become the World's First Country to Achieve 100% Electric Car Sales from 2022. And the picture they have is a typical street in Norway, and all along the street there are car chargers, and there's cars plugged into the chargers. And this is what we need to have in the United States. Now, I spent 9 weeks a few months back, last winter, just about a year ago, actually. We headed out to Boston for a long time, and there was a very nice row of car chargers downtown across from the electric company. Unfortunately, there were only about 8 chargers, and of course, it was always a matter of competition to see if we were going to get there in time. But it was really nice to drive in from the suburbs, plug in at the charger, and it only takes about 2 hours to get a full charge. So I'd sit there, and it was just really pleasant to be able to sit there in my car with the charger going. And with my car, I'm able to, if I'm charging, I can run all my, the heater, and I can run all the stuff in the car, like the DVD player and all that stuff, off of the charging, and so it doesn't draw my battery down. And so I was actually quite comfortable there. And of course, it was during COVID, so I wasn't able to go in. We went there for my wife had to do some stuff there, and so I was able to just sit in the car and charge. But it's just another example that once you start doing the right thing, once you start moving towards renewable energy, you discover that it's much more practical, and you can do it much more quickly than you anticipated. And so that's really the key here, is for us to just start doing it. And so if you want to apply this to your personal life, just start doing that one thing that you've been thinking, maybe I should do X, whatever X is. It's, X could be starting a compost bin, or X could be buying a plug-in electric car. And of course, I would recommend buying the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid, which I think is one of the greatest cars ever made. That's my own personal opinion. And, get rid of that diesel with all the exhaust smoke, get rid of that internal combustion engine, which once you get used to driving the plug-in hybrid, you really get used to the quietness of not having your engine going full blast all the time. And you really get used to the idea that you don't have to go to the gas station every week. I just filled up yesterday, and it was roughly 6 weeks since my previous fill up. So I'm really, pretty happy with the way I've been able to drive lately. I'm up over 60 miles per gallon right now on my plug-in hybrid. So, and with gas prices the way they are, that's really making a difference in our budget, is being able to fill the car using electricity instead of having to fill the car with gasoline every single week. Just think of all that money that you are giving to Exxon, to Marathon, to all the oil companies. You're giving them that money, and what they're doing, part of what they're doing with that money is using it to lobby in order to get money from the federal government. So they're taking the money you're giving them for their product, and they're using that to pay lobbyists who get money from your tax dollars. And so, do you really want all your money to be going to these oil companies? Now, electric companies, aren't much better, but the difference is that electric companies are getting better, and they can be made better. Electric supply can be switched over, and in fact, it is being switched over to wind and solar and other renewable energy sources. But oil and gas, gasoline can't be switched over to something cleaner. You can't transfer from gasoline to clean gasoline. Yeah, I know some people talk about biofuels, but the research is pretty clear that the best you can do pretty much with biofuels is break even. That is, get the same amount of energy out that you put into making them. And so theoretically, you could break that pattern and get more, but there's no need to. And as we learned from Mark Jacobson, the electric car only takes a quarter of as much energy to run. So you're using 3/4 less energy to get around, and it's cleaner and it's quieter and it takes less maintenance. The cars, there's almost no moving parts, so things don't break down. We're at 48,000 miles, and we're about to take a trip, so we're going to be over 50,000 miles, and we have not had any mechanical breakdowns. And so it's just a time for us to be doing this thing. And one of the questions when they were talking about the scientists up there who went over the polar ice cap on the Nova show, they asked them, what's at stake here, and how much time have we got? And the answers pretty much came back, literally everything is at stake. Our entire society is at stake here. And in terms of how much time do we have, we don't have any more time. This is not something where you should be planning 5 or 10 years down the line to get an electric vehicle or a plug-in vehicle, because that may well be too late. We're already seeing disruptions in the supply chain. If we don't move aggressively towards these things, getting rooftop solar on your house, switching from a gas heat to geothermal heat, if we don't do those things literally now, we may not be able to do them ever. We may lose the ability to respond to the crisis. So, thanks so much for listening, folks. We should be back live next week in studio. This is Joe DeMare signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was